over information, wrong information, even well intentioned but totally off the mark information, it's very critical for all of us to receive the right information from the right source. And today, we are privileged to have Dr. Neeraj Jain, Chairman, Department of Chest Medicine, Sir Gangaram Hospital, New Delhi, with us to address this subject that has impacted our lives to no end. Dr. Jain, it's my esteemed pleasure to welcome you to Vistara on behalf of the entire Vistara family. We are looking forward to listening to you. So without much ado, I would like to hand it over to our SVP HR, Ms. Deepa Chadha, and Dr. Girish Patil, our medical officer, to take this fireside chat with you forward. Would like to inform everybody who is on this webinar that this session is being recorded. Over to you, Deepa.
Thank you, Vikrant. Dr. Jain, I can't emphasize enough that Vistara is ever grateful to you to make time for this session. And I will now get into my, my report, whole host of questions that we have received from our staff. So, Dr. Jain, I think self-evident that 2021 is very different from 2020, and the new strains, symptoms, which are the severity of the infection. There are a whole host of questions which the staff has on, how this virus is infecting us and what is so different this year, and how it is impacting different age groups, different generations, kids, younger generation. There is a specific question from Meherjeet Kaur from Delhi cabin crew, who's also asking, what is the difference between this infection and a normal cold, cough, fever?
So, do you want me to start kind of, with the basic differences that I think that would be the most appropriate way to start.
Yeah.
So compared with what we were up against last year, which was a new virus, a new pandemic, which we had no clue about, and we learned as we went along. We all learned how to manage this, and as we got through more numbers in terms of patients, we formulated our own strategies and plans, and some of them worked, some of them didn't work. When we thought that we had all the knowledge and that we were ready to tackle anything that came with this particular virus, this year, this wave that has hit us, we've discovered to our horror that this is almost a totally new virus in terms of how it is affecting people, what all symptoms it's producing, and what all other complications. The biggest difference, which everyone has been emphasizing, and all of you must be aware, is that this one is highly infectious, very, very infectious, so much so that there is almost evidence now that this is airborne. There is no other way to explain the way it is spreading. It is spreading like wildfire. In one household, one person gets it, almost certainly everybody in that household is infected. People who have been living in a bio bubble, so to say, and actually have been maintaining all the discipline that we've been kind of emphasizing on last year, have also got it, and for whole families that have been living in a closed environment. So we have to understand this virus is spreading very, very quickly, and the sheer numbers is what has overwhelmed us this time. The notion that this was highly infectious but less severe is also wrong. It is just as bad in terms of the complications it is producing and the morbidity and the mortality that this virus is producing. So not only is it highly infectious, it is just as lethal. And that's why you see what you see around you, where our hospitals have no beds, no medicines, no oxygen, and people are left running from pillar to post trying to get a patient into hospital. And even though I belong to the profession and I have seen it up close, the whole year I've been involved with COVID care right from day one, organizing our forces in Gangaram, trying to get everything off the ground. I realize that hospitals have their limitations today. They are actually, the resources are scarce and there's a crunch. So you cannot provide the kind of care that you would ideally like to all the patients. So that is the basic difference that we have between the two pandemics. How this virus is different from the normal common cold that we see. The normal common cold usually begins with, let's say, a runny nose or sneezing or a congested nose or a blocked nose with a cough. And usually, if it's a viral cold, it would be accompanied with fever. But if it is only an allergic phenomenon, usually fever is not a prominent feature. But the body ache, the degree of body ache, the muscle aches and pains, breathlessness, and all the other symptoms, especially this time the tummy symptoms, lots of people are getting diarrhea with this infection. That is what differentiates it from the common cold virus. Today, if anybody gets a fever with any symptoms of cold, you have to assume it is a corona infection and not the normal common cold. Sorry, you're muted.
You're on mute.
Yeah. So Meher also asked that what are the 3 different stages of infection and what should one do at home to, take care of oneself during those 3 stages?
So I would digress from that. I don't think there are 3 different stages. Actually, there are no clearly demarcated stages. Yes, you have mild disease, which you can treat at home. Moderate to severe disease usually will need to be treated in hospital, but some moderate cases can be managed at home. Now, this severity grading is, what we understand is based on the CT scan severity grading one, where the CT scan gives you a score out of 25 or out of 40. For example, any score from 10 to 15 is moderate out of 25 on the CT. And this is based on the extent of the involvement of the lung. So on the CT, what they do is they quantify the amount of lung involvement and give each lobe or each part of the lung a score. And they add it all up and then they give you your CT severity score. Now, that is the one single parameter. However, take a patient who's a diabetic, who's elderly, who's got chronic kidney disease, and who has only a CT severity score of 7, which would fall into the mild category. Yet, this patient may behave like a severe uh, COVID pneumonia. This patient's oxygen may be lower than normal because of the other comorbidities. So, this is the demarcation is not that clear. You can't have clear-cut guidelines, but if somebody's oxygen level is maintained at normal, somebody's fever is responding to paracetamol, and there are no other symptoms in terms of any evidence of clotting or vertigo or severe diarrhea, then these people can be treated as mild and they can be managed at home. Anybody whose oxygen level is falling, and the way we assess oxygen is everyone knows what a pulse oximeter is now. Every household has one. Whatever the quality of pulse oximeters, it is important to remember that when you want to measure the saturation, it's very important to keep the hand in a relaxed position. This is something I emphasize to everybody because we get so many panic calls just because they've not taken the saturation correctly. So you keep the hand relaxed on any surface, apply the pulse oximeter on any one of these 3 fingers, leave it for 10 seconds, don't keep looking at it. Then see after 10 seconds what is the reading, and that is your actual reading. Most people will keep the pulse oximeter on and keep staring at, and when you do that, your oxygen saturation falls. That is not your true saturation. So if your oxygen saturation after walking, I'm assuming you're COVID positive, if after walking for about 6 minutes, and the 6-minute walk test means that you walk at your own leisurely pace, at your own pace, there's no target, you don't have to run or walk fast. After 6 minutes, you sit down, take your oxygen saturation. If your lungs have been otherwise healthy and your oxygen saturation is falling to below 94, you need to consult your doctor. If it stays above 94%, you are safe to stay at home and continue the treatment that has been advised. You need to unmute every time, Deepa.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you were just offline when we were discussing, doctor, that, and you mentioned regarding mental stress at this point in time. So what would you advise staff and our families, between this balance of panic and staying calm? How does one manage the current situation?
I think it's a very important part of managing people because this will decide how they react to somebody in the family or themselves who is diagnosed positive. So people have to understand that there's no point having an undue fear. What if I get it? Am I going to survive? Am I going to be left crippled for life? What if my family gets it? You're worried about your spouse, your children, your parents. Undue worry will not help you in any way. get the facts straight. 90% of the people today also, even with this new strain, will recover. If you have any symptoms where you suspect you have the corona infection, even if you can't get tested, please isolate yourself in the first instance. And isolation has to be very strict. We can never emphasize enough that isolation means you are in your isolated area, you have no contact with the outside people in your house, except for the 10-15 minute period when somebody needs to come into your room or clean or give you some food. At that time, both people are wearing N95 masks, and they stay at a distance of at least 6 to 10 feet away from each other and do not talk to each other. Right? So that is the kind of contact you're allowed in isolation. So if you isolate yourself and you're not unduly scared, follow the basic principles. If your oxygen saturation is fine, if your fever is responding to paracetamol, if you're not breathless, if you don't have any serious comorbidities, chances are you will recover without any issues, and you can take only very mild treatment, which any physician will advise you. Whether it's drug A or drug B or drug C actually doesn't matter. We've got different combinations; they all do equally well. The other thing is the fear of falling seriously ill and having to be hospitalized or losing your life. We have now reached a stage where you open your WhatsApp, you open your televisions, you talk to people, all that is being discussed is corona, corona, and corona. There is no normal discussion anywhere. We do not have any discussion on any other issue. Please take time out every day, especially people in in an industry like yours, where your hours are irregular, where you don't have a predictable time period frame. Take time out to relax. Whatever relaxation technique helps you, please do it. You don't have to think about corona, you don't have to discuss corona, and don't listen to the television. I think you can listen to the television for maybe 10 minutes a day, but after that it doesn't make any sense in my opinion. And do not do not believe WhatsApp forwards blindly, please. The biggest preoccupation of everyone is reading the WhatsApp and forwarding it without thinking, without investigating what is the authenticity of that message and where it's come from. Please refrain from doing that. You're only spreading panic. You're not doing anything else. You must understand, all the news that spreads is the negative news. Nobody spreads positivity, unfortunately, as far as this is concerned.
Yep. Before I hand over to Dr. Girish for other questions, I have one last question coming from Chandar Kumar Singha from Delhi. He's our aircraft maintenance engineer. What role can a strong immunity play, and how do we strengthen the same at present times?
That's an excellent question, because what protects you against any infection is your own immunity, nothing else. So your own immunity depends on having a healthy body and mind both. So nutrition, in terms of what you eat, how regularly you take your meals, how balanced your diet is, so that you're not lacking in any of the vitamins, essential minerals, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, everything. Secondly, are you getting enough rest or sleep? Because a 24-hour cycle has to be divided into adequate sleep, adequate exercise, work, and eating. If you can divide your 24 hours, do a little bit of each, get adequate rest and sleep, and you do not have any chronic disease in terms of diabetes or blood pressure or kidney disease, your immunity will be absolutely robust and be capable of fighting most of these infections. And in fact, what protects us today also is that innate immunity. What has protected a lot of us who've not gotten the disease, fortunately, is possibly your innate immunity, which has been strong enough to fight the virus and not let it affect you.
What's the role of yoga and other breathing exercises in building immunity, and whether one should do that at this point in time, continuing to do it post-COVID or
If
after
you
getting
can,
the infection?
if it actually, so don't do yoga because somebody is saying that yoga protects you or boosts your immunity. Yoga, in my opinion, is another form of relaxation. Lots of people do yoga because it makes them feel better. Yes, yoga has its advantages, but if you're a normal person, if I go for a brisk walk or I sit down and do some of the breathing exercise in yoga, there's no difference. See, our bodies are meant to function optimally. If I go for a brisk walk or a run, I am doing the same thing that somebody with yoga is doing. But yes, if yoga diverts your mind, if it relaxes you, if it makes you feel better, you can do some toning exercises with yoga, you can do muscle strengthening, certainly by all means. But don't take it as a sure shot prevention and boosting of immunity. That is not true.
Over to you, Dr. Patil. Dr. Patil, please unmute yourself.
All right. Yeah, sorry. Good afternoon, Dr. Jain.
Afternoon, hi. Yeah.
Yeah, we had some queries from our employees regarding the treatment and certain associated issues with that. And I would like to put it in the context like as nowadays certain names of certain medicines has been become so much on the tip of the tongue. Earlier, we used to find it like tongue twister, like favipiravir, then remdesivir and all.
Yes.
So as far as treatment and other things are concerned, what are the, as you have explained, the role of comorbidities, but how do they will actually affect, and what are the roles of certain specific commonly seen comorbidities apart from diabetes and all, like pregnancy, very young children, newborns, those kind of cases, transplant cases, which are like find themselves in a very peculiar situation because they do get immunosuppressant treatments, and this is a time when you need immunity, so they are kind of caught in a double whammy situation.
So let's go age. Very young children are also affected with corona, but fortunately, the incidence of severe disease in very young children is not very high, and most children will recover with just symptomatic treatment, rest, and fluids and nutrition. But children who do get seriously affected, unfortunately, will require hospitalization, but they are not more prone to severe disease. I think children, by and large, are lucky. We are lucky because we have a lot of young parents who get the infection, who have small children who they cannot keep separately from them, but most of them do very well. The other extreme of age, elderly people who may not have any comorbidities are still also considered immune compromised in a way. If they are very robust, if they are very active, then they may have a normal immunity, but they are at a higher risk than somebody who's young. The people who have diabetes, chronic cardiac conditions, chronic kidney disease, chronic liver disease are immune compromised, as are people on cancer chemotherapy, people with autoimmune problems like rheumatoid arthritis who are on long-term immunosuppressants, and transplant post-transplant patients who have to take immunosuppressant drugs to keep their transplanted organ healthy. Now these people, even if, like we discussed earlier, even if on the CT scan they have mild disease, should be taken as moderate. You should step up their category 1 almost immediately, because there is a very good chance that these people will worsen in a way that you are not expecting. And trust me, in corona, you have to preempt. You have to, why we monitor patients, some patients more closely, you have to preempt complications, because once they occur, we do not really have a lot of treatment for the complications. Antiviral drugs, you have the oral drug, which has been, in use in India for a long time, favipiravir, which is not a drug that has been used worldwide. There is no data to support that it actually works. Japan has, it was sort of, its origin is in Japan. India has taken it on in a big way. The thing about corona is, it's, if I take 100 patients of corona and I put them all on the same drug versus another 100 who I don't treat except with vitamins and paracetamols, chances are in both groups 90% will recover. Now, you want to give that credit to the medicine that I've used, or because the disease is such? Let's be honest with ourselves. None of us know exactly what these medicines do. Favipiravir, including remdesivir also. Remdesivir is the IV drug which is used in hospital treatment. You cannot give remdesivir at home. Now, if I come to my own personal experience, in the last year, moderate to severe cases, if you get in early into their treatment, the three most crucial parts of our treatment and trying to save these patients have been adequate doses of intravenous steroids. Steroids have a major role. I'll just say another line about them after this. I have used a lot of intravenous remdesivir and anticoagulants in terms of either a low molecular weight heparin injection or a tablet, whichever one you can use. These three drugs have actually saved a lot of lives. If you get in early in the first week in patients who are moderate or severe and you start them on these medicines, they will do well. Steroids work in a way that we know steroids work. Steroids are anti-inflammatory. What this virus does is produces a very severe inflammatory response in your body, which in terms of life-threatening complications affects your lungs. In terms of nuisance value, it affects your muscles, your joints, your headaches, your body aches, your diarrhea, which can cause a lot of distress, but those are not life-threatening. So you need the steroids in adequate doses. Now that's important. When you give steroids, your physician has to decide what the dose is, because the dose is related to your body weight, your age, and your other conditions. So if you take adequate doses of steroids and you combine it with some of these other drugs, then you have your best chance of pulling through or fighting this infection. But not everyone responds. There are 2 to 5% cases who, in spite of what you do, will be left with significant disease, or some of them may not even survive in spite of the best treatment.
And going forward, the next I'd like to ask, when somebody is on home isolation or home care, what are the signs which they can identify wherein they can decide whether to go for hospitalization or not, even before consulting the doctor? Or what are, in other words, what are kind of red flags which we need to be aware of while in home isolation?
Yeah, so the single most important observation which they can keep themselves, which we discussed earlier, is your oxygen saturation measurement. You may not feel breathless. There was a term that came into being last year, you would have heard of it, called happy hypoxia. Hypoxia is the phenomenon by which your oxygen level in the blood is low. Hypoxia, oxia is oxygen, right? Hypo is low. Now, these patients may have an oxygen saturation of 88%, but they will say, look, I'm not feeling breathless, I'm fine. Whereas they should be actually complaining of breathlessness. So that's why measuring your oxygen saturation is the single most important criteria. And like I said, after a 6-minute walk test, if you're otherwise healthy and you don't have any cardiac disease, or you don't have fluid overload, you don't have chronic lung disease in terms of chronic bronchitis or interstitial lung disease, then if your oxygen saturation falls to below 94% on walking 6 minutes, that is a red flag for you. If your fever refuses to come down with any measures, you keep getting high fever, that is another red flag. If you start getting dizziness, palpitations, chest pain, indicating that you may be getting clot formation, then that is another red flag. So these are the major things that you should keep a lookout for when you're at home. If you have chronic lung disease and your normal saturation has been 92%, then you have to really play it by your symptoms and see how much it is falling. Then that criteria of 94% doesn't apply to you. Lots of our patients will have a saturation of 92% anyway because their lungs are bad. So they have to be assessed by their respective specialists.
Okay. And also about the word regarding the convalescent plasma. What's the role of it? Because that was, I remember last year it was, when it came on, it was treated as a magic bullet. But nowadays we are hearing certain official words, even from a lot of specialists, that it may not be that like that.
So, the interesting thing about Corona is you go to different countries, you go to different parts of the world, they've all got their own reservations about a particular treatment. One treatment that is very prevalent in one part of the world, the other part has shunned it completely. Plasma, just so that everyone understands in very simple terms, what does plasma do? You take plasma, what is called convalescent plasma, from patients who have recovered from COVID. So you take that plasma 4 weeks after they've recovered, and you expect these patients to have a certain level of antibodies against the virus in their blood. So you take that plasma and you inject it in somebody who's in dire straits, who's got severe disease, who's unable to fight the disease, whose body's immune system is so overwhelmed that it is not being able to react or fight the disease. The premise is that you give them plasma and you give them a temporary boost with the antibodies that you're injecting in them. Antibodies have a very limited lifespan, and what they do, nobody knows. In my opinion, plasma may have a role very early on in people who have got severe disease, who you expect will worsen. You may give them plasma. Even that is iffy. There is a big question mark whether plasma does anything at all, actually. But because it's received so much publicity, you will find that patients who, attendants or families of patients who are very sick will say, Doc, why aren't you giving my patient plasma? Plasma is supposed to work. So it's very difficult sometimes to refuse plasma because, if they turn around and ask me, Doc, what is the harm in giving plasma? Will it harm my patient? Then I don't have an answer. I know it won't harm the patient. But trust me, for all of us, plasma is producing so much stress, which is why I'm saying this. It has a very limited role, if at all. Do not go berserk trying to find plasma for your patient. It produces a lot of stress. I know people who've been running around the city for 36 hours, 48 hours, trying to find plasma for their patient. Please don't do that. Discuss it with your specialist. Everyone is educated now. Ask your specialist whether he or she really thinks the plasma is required. If not, please sit back and say, okay, we are doing the best that is known and that is possible, and we just need to give it time.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, Doctor, coming to the next point, like post-COVID, like we have a lot of patients who are now cured from the COVID. Now, a lot of new knowledge is coming in this post-COVID. What are symptoms, organ damages, and all. So, would like to have throw a little light on that, so everybody benefits and they know when to expect. Is there any particular risk factor which can predict that this person is likely to get kind of a severe post-COVID symptom, even if he doesn't have a COVID infection as such at that point of time?
There are a few organs that we need to keep a watch on even when people recover from COVID. And this usually applies to patients who had severe COVID disease, not mild. So because COVID affects the lungs in the sort of biggest way, let's understand your lungs get inflamed. And again, putting it very simply, your lungs have millions of small air sacs, which have very thin membrane. And each air sac has a blood vessel going right next to it. And the sort of space between them is it's got microns, that membrane, that it's oxygen that crosses across from the air to the blood and carbon dioxide that comes back from the blood to the air. And that's what you do when you breathe in and out. Now, this interstitium, this thin membrane, is what gets inflamed in the COVID infection. So what happens? A membrane that is supposed to be microns thick may become a millimeter thick. But what it does is it becomes too thick for the gases to cross over. So your oxygen you breathe in air, the air that you breathe in has oxygen, whatever is getting in, but it doesn't get into the blood. So your carbon dioxide, which the blood is supposed to give out to the air that you breathe out, it doesn't happen. So the interstitium gets very inflamed. And in corona, what we've seen is a very rapid development of interstitial fibrosis in a lot of these patients, which means that the scarring mechanism kicks in very early, and scar formation becomes a very prominent thing very early on. Lots of people have heard about ILD, or interstitial lung disease, which is associated with a lot of other autoimmune conditions, and some of them are not known, idiopathic, but that takes months to years. In corona, we've seen interstitial fibrosis develop in weeks. So patients with severe COVID pneumonia should follow up with their pulmonologist for at least 3 to 6 months with repeated x-rays and lung function tests. There is a role for giving them prolonged steroids and some antifibrotic drugs to try and limit the development of this scarring, because this will cripple them for life. Their lung capacities are finished for life. So, somebody who's young and healthy, now in your, industry again, you will probably fail your medical test if you have recovered from severe COVID and your lung function is impaired. So your oxygen level is low. I'm just saying that this is one organ that people need to keep a watch on. The other thing, which unfortunately a lot of people and younger people have not realized that even when you recover from COVID, the tendency to form clots can remain. So you can develop deep vein thrombosis in your legs. You can develop spontaneous clots in the lungs. You can also develop clots in the brain circulation, right? Now, if I'm young and I'm fit and I exercise, I recover from corona and I want to go back to my gymming and my fitness routine. Uh, I've had two instances where very young, fit people have died within 4 weeks of recovering from corona just because of this. Very unfortunate. Please take it easy for at least 4 to 6 weeks in terms of strenuous physical exercise because the tendency to form clots remains. So people with severe COVID disease do their blood markers if they've been at a risk. If they, especially if they've got cardiac disease, diabetes, and kidney disease, or they have got malignancies, because people with malignancies have a tendency to form clots anyway. So you must keep a watch on their D dimers. If necessary, do other investigations to keep a watch, make sure they're not developing clots. You can do ultrasound examination of the legs, you can do ultrasound examination of the neck vessels just to make sure that you prevent these complications. The third most important, long term coming back, it's not my field. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I feel in terms of the holistic care, the mental state issues have to be addressed. Some people, everyone cannot handle stress in the same way. If you are vulnerable, if you are susceptible to depression and anxiety and panic, it can remain a part of your life forever if you've been through severe COVID. That fear psychosis sets in. So you have to get out of that. You have to build your confidence back again and gradually work it. So whatever you do when you recover from corona, please take it easy. Take your time to get back into your normal groove. The fourth important thing, in some people, corona affects the heart muscle without their knowing it. These are young people who do not have heart disease, but the corona has inflamed their heart muscle. Then when they recover, they still don't know that their heart muscle is still recovering, is still inflamed. They can get arrhythmias, they can get sudden decompensation of the cardiac function, especially again on exercise. So the bottom line is allow your body to recover from the insult that it's been subjected to. Please take it easy, take your time.
Thank you, Doctor, very much for that. Those points were very insightful. Deepa ma'am, over to you for the vaccination related things.
Yeah, just before I get into some clarifications, doctor, related to some myths and do's and don'ts, just a follow-through question: what should the primary caregiver? What are the precautions which the primary caregiver should do while taking care of the family member at home, infected family member at home?
So the primary caregiver has to be empathetic with the patient. The patient is not an untouchable. I'm saying this because I've seen families also try and say, why don't you admit him? I can't manage at home because they have their own fears and myths. They believe in some things. So a family member has to make sure that the isolation is very strict. It's very important for the caregiver to enforce isolation, to enforce that when that person who's in the isolation room stays up and about, stays mobile but doesn't do strenuous exercise, gets regular meals, and stays well hydrated, and measures the oxygen saturation, notes it down. If you're otherwise well, twice a day is more than enough. You don't need to keep the pulse oximeter on your finger all day long. If you can do that and you get adequate rest, you sleep well, that is all that the primary caregiver has to do. If the oxygen saturation starts falling, then it is the responsibility of the caregiver to make sure that they get the person to a medical facility on time. They start exploring where the person can be cared for. For people who are diabetic, the primary caregiver's role is actually very important in people who are otherwise vulnerable. So you have diabetes, you have heart disease. You have to make sure that your regular medicines are all going in at that time. Corona is not the only thing you're managing. The underlying conditions have to be managed. If your blood sugar has to be done, so be it. The caregiver with a mask and gloves can do the blood sugar of a patient and not be exposed or be at risk. So the caregiver has to not worry. If you're taking adequate precautions, now, for example, when doctors go on rounds, if I'm doing my OPDs every day wearing an N95 mask with another mask on top of it, with gloves, and I'm keeping my social distance, after all, I'm equally vulnerable. I'm spending 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours in the clinic. But if you take these precautions, by and large, you will not get an infection. Masking, I just want to take this time before we, run out of this, because how do you wear a mask and how do you take it off, and what masks are good is very important here. You're at home, you're a caregiver. When you go into the room, wear an N95 mask. After sanitizing your hands, put another disposable mask on top of it. And then when you go in, once your mask is on, you do not touch your mask. You don't keep moving it up and down. You don't to talk. People pull their mask down, talk, and then push it back up again. When you go out of the room, you discard the top mask, throw it away, sanitize your hands, remove your other mask, keep it in a clean paper bag. You can reuse your N95 that way. You don't have to throw away both the masks. You can use cloth masks as double masks. You don't have to have an N95. If you use a cloth mask and a disposable surgical mask, even that will do the job. But the mask has to be well applied. There should be no gaps all around the mask, so that the air that you're breathing in goes through the mask and not around the mask.
Okay, I'll just club some of my questions related to myths or maybe clarity, doctor. What these questions are from Siddharth Grover, Gurgaon, Vikram Kumar Singh, Mumbai, Manmeet Singh, Barham, Raipur. What does airborne mean? Do the following help? And if so, how? Steam, gargling, mouthwash, etc. RT-PCR accuracy, and then I'll come to the next few after we have finished. So over to you, doctor.
So the airborne theory is becoming stronger now because of the way this thing is spreading. Airborne means, literally, if I was to hypothesize as to why the coronavirus has become airborne now, why is it an airborne infection? If I'm infected and I cough, I produce a lot of droplets which have the virus in them. This weather, when it's hot and it's dry, the droplet gets dehydrated. What is left behind is that virus particle, which is very small and very light. It can remain suspended in the air for maybe minutes, maybe hours also sometimes. Now, if there's a breeze blowing, if there's a wind blowing, they can get carried and they can travel distances. It can travel 50 meters, let's say. So, if I'm out, if I'm exercising in the open, and there have been people around there who've been coughing, and I run, and when I run, I take deeper breaths and faster breaths. I inhale more air, the chances that I can pick it up. That's what an airborne infection means. So for now, what people should do is take extra precautions. Do not go and exercise in the outdoors for at least the next 2 to 4 weeks, because we don't know what's going to happen. No scientist has been able to clearly say, yes, this is the way it's being transmitted, but the theory has a lot of basis that this is now airborne, right? So that is the one thing that you need to take care. What was the second part? Sorry, you.
So the second part is the role of gargle, steam, mouthwash.
So steaming and gargling is not going to help you in a big way, except if your throat is irritable. If you've got a pharyngitis, you get an irritant cough, or there's mucus that is difficult to cough out, then steaming is important. Steam, what people have started doing, and I said it the other day also, people think it's the hot temperature of the steam which is killing the virus in your throat, and that's why they're taking steam. So I've seen people from the steamer directly, the pipe in the mouth, and they're sucking in steam. You're injuring your throat lining. Steam has only one purpose. You sit away from the steamer, or you start breathing through the steamer as warm, moist air. That's all. Hot temperature hitting your throat damages your lining, makes you more susceptible. Gargling, this virus is not, it's not like a food particle that has gotten stuck there. You can't gargle. It's like, you're saying that you're rinsing the whole area with a high pressure jet, trying to remove the virus mechanically. No, it doesn't. So we do not need to emphasize steam and gargles. It'll help people who have already got the infection, whose throats are irritable, where mucus is getting stuck and they're finding it difficult to bring it out. So normal healthy diet, normal food, stay hydrated, steam if it helps you, if it soothes you, that's fine. No harm done.
And the role of when to get blood test and CT scan done, who should get it done and when?
So the RT-PCR is still the best test that we have today. It is not 100%. No test is 100%. This virus has also shown that there are a lot of people who've been RT-PCR negative yet have the disease. And the reasons for that can be many. Yes, the virus has changed, so maybe the number of the physical presence of the virus, the numbers may be lesser in the throat. It may not be sticking around in the throat for very long, and that's why the sampling does not cover the area. The second is that the virus has changed its characteristic. The third is that we are overburdened. There is too many tests happening with too few resources. Now, if I was to call somebody home, and when there's a crunch, you employ everybody and anybody to do a job. Everyone is not necessarily fully trained in that job. You train them on the go. Now, the sampling technique also is important. So whoever gets a sample taken, make sure that the person who's taking the sample actually goes right to the back of the throat and takes a proper sample over 10, 15 seconds. Not just that the swab goes in and comes out. Okay, so those are the things. Now, when you come to CT scans, CT scans are being abused right now. Everyone wants to go and get a CT scan on day 1 or day 2, especially if the RT-PCR is negative. If you assume that you have the infection and you have got a negative RT-PCR, please isolate yourself, watch yourself for the next 4 to 5 days. If you develop symptoms, you get yourself treated. If you don't have moderate disease, if you're not short of oxygen, if you are not predisposed to severe corona infection, please do not get a CT done. Leave this resource for people who really need it. It's a waste of money. It's unnecessary exposure to radiation. So go by your physician. Please do not rush to get a CT to diagnose COVID. What people are doing is, if your RT-PCR is negative, they go and get a CT. Then the danger is you get your CT done on day 1 and day 2 of the infection, and you come up with a CT score of 2. You say, I've got mild disease. When in fact, if you follow your progression on day 7, you may be a severe COVID. But you'll say, look, my symptoms have increased, but my CT was mild. And if I do a CT on day 7, day 8, your score may be 15. Now that is the time to really do the CT, not on day 1 or day 2. So there are no blood tests for corona. We use the common tests that everybody knows about, the C-reactive protein, the D-dimer, ferritin levels, IL-6 levels. These are used as markers of inflammation to try and gauge the severity of the infection. Again, do not do them on day 1 if you have mild disease or moderate disease. Please save it for people who have severe disease or who are at risk. Then, if you're really worried, on day 7, you're not well, you're not better, even when you started with mild infection, you can get these done, including a CT, to assess the severity of your disease to see if you need a step up of treatment.
My last theme and a volley of questions there is related to vaccination, doctor. And the questions being asked by Sumanto De, Manager Safety Training, Tapas from Sales Support, Siddharth, Geeta Uppal, Rohan Gupta from Bhubaneswar, Praveen Saha, Neha Kapoor, and Tapas. Yeah, is vaccination effective? And which is a better vaccine to take? Can one choose if one wishes to take one vaccine over the other? Can the person change the brand of the second shot after being vaccinated with one brand of vaccine? What should be the minimum, maximum timing and gap between first shot and second shot for each brand? I mean, and that scenario happening if I've been infected by COVID or if I've not been infected by COVID. What are the precautions that one should take despite having taken vaccination? Yeah.
So in India, we've had only 2 vaccines so far. I hear that the Russian vaccine is coming in a day or 2. The first lot will arrive. But both the vaccines in India, the one produced by Bharat Biotech and the Serum Institute, are both equally efficacious. All these vaccines have been fast-tracked. You must understand, a normal vaccine would take 2 to 3 years to go through the process and be marketed. All these have been fast-tracked because we were in a pandemic all over the world. Now, both these vaccines, in my opinion, are the same in terms of efficacy or side effects or whatever you might say. The purpose of vaccination in this stage of the disease is not to prevent infection. It may prevent, it may not prevent, but I think it is definitely there that if you've got both your shots and you get the infection, you will most likely get only mild disease and not severe disease, most likely, unless you have other risk factors. So that is the reason why everyone should take a vaccine. Whoever's eligible who can get the vaccine should take the vaccine. The other thing is side effects of vaccines. Yes, all vaccines have side effects. The clot theory has been over publicized. I don't think that is a real threat. Any vaccine, any medicine in the world will have some incidence of an adverse reaction. Some people are unlucky, they will get a reaction. Doesn't mean that the product is bad. So they should take the vaccine. The biggest problem that people are facing now is a lot of people are coming back after the first dose of the vaccine. They come back 4 weeks later with a COVID infection. These people were due for their second dose. So once you develop a COVID infection between, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks after your first shot, you should defer your second dose by at least another 6 weeks after you recover. Do not worry about your second dose immediately, right? That's one. Secondly, there are people coming who've taken their first shot or second shot, and 4 days, 5 days later, they're coming back with flying COVID infection. Now, I don't know, I don't think there is a cause-effect relationship. I don't think the infection has been caused by the virus. What I think is happening is a lot of these vaccination centers are overcrowded. There's a lot of people there. So, or you may be an asymptomatic carrier at the time that you went in for the vaccine, and it's just a question of, it's coincidental that your incubation period was happening and that you developed the infection, or you picked it up on the day of the vaccination. But it should not deter you from taking the vaccine. You should go with full precautions. Do not remove your N95 mask at any time when you're there at the vaccination center.
My last question, Doctor, is from Neha Kapoor and Tapas. What would be the social responsibility of someone post-vaccination?
The social responsibility of someone post-vaccination would be that you continue to behave as if you have not been vaccinated. Right? The most important message you can give to family, friends, and people around you is to say, look, I have received my 2 doses, yet I am not being careless. I'm still following the same precautions, because that is what is most important. Nobody knows how long the vaccine is going to protect you. You may come to know that now you need a third dose in 6 months' time because your protection is running out. So assume that you're still at risk. Assume that you can still spread the infection. Only then we'll be able to contain this. Otherwise, I'm afraid it's going to be, there are lots of groups who are socializing because they say, oh, we got both our shots, so we are allowed to socialize without masks. That is not correct. That is not true. Please continue to spread the word that precautions are still the most important weapon that we have against this.
Thank you, Doctor. The questions are too many, but we are very cognizant of your precious time. Over to you, Vikrant.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Patil. We are now coming towards the close of the session. So I would now request our Chief Commercial Officer, Mr. to offer a vote of thanks. Over to you, Vinod.
Thank you, Vikrant. Thank you very much. And Dr. Jain, thank you so much for spending time with us. You're a busy man anyways, and especially in today's times, things are definitely hectic for you. But despite all that, you've spent almost an hour, and we also saw the other recording of almost 1.5 hours, which you shared with us, of what you have been finding across this journey and sharing your knowledge with us. And like you rightly said when we started off, we should have some common points that everyone should know, so that there's no misinformation or nothing that is spreading in the wrong circles. So I would want to, on behalf of Vistara, there's almost 500 people who tuned in. Thank you for the Vistara team for coming in and joining us. And on behalf of all of us, Doctor, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. We do know that the journey is still some ways ahead. There's still a mountain to climb. Thank you to you and all the healthcare professionals for taking care of all of us, and especially to you once again for sharing your words of wisdom with us and sharing some of the best practices that I'm sure we will adopt. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vinod. And thank you everyone for logging in. We are now closing the session. Please take the best care of yourselves and your families and loved ones, and have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.